The morning mist in the Shadowvale forest was a living thing. It curled around the ancient, gnarled oaks like spectral fingers, swallowing sound and sight until the world existed in shades of gray and whispers. To most, it was a place of dread, a territory ruled by tails and teeth. But to Alara, the forest's edge was a sanctuary. Here, the villagers' sharp whispers and accusing glances couldn't reach. Here, she could simply breathe. At 20, Alara carried a loneliness as deep and quiet as the forest pools. Orphaned by a winter fever 3 years past, she had become the village's ghost, present but unseen, or seen only as a curse. A failed harvest, a lame horse, a stillborn lamb, misfortune had a name, and it was hers. Ilara the Blighted, they muttered. She wore their scorn like a second skin, thin and threadbare. Her basket was heavy with moonleaf and silverroot when the first howl shattered the morning hush. It wasn't the distant cry of a common wolf. This was a sound that vibrated in the marrow, a deep, resonant song that spoke of immensity and ancient sorrow. It came from the direction of the Blackwater River. Ilara froze, her blood turning to ice water. Just yesterday, in the village square, the air had been thick with fear and fury. Shepherd Croft's best ram had been found torn apart on the forest's fringe. The tracks, men said with hushed terror, were too large, too deep. Shadow walkers, old Nan had croaked, her voice like dry leaves. The wolfkin, they remember the old blood debt. They've come to collect. The village elder, a hardened man named Torvin with fists like stone and a heart to match, had declared a culling. A hunting party would enter the Shadowvale at week's end to purge the vermin. Ilara had spoken without thinking, a single desperate word. Don't. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any howl. Torvin's eyes, cold as river pebbles, had fixed on her. The blighted girl speaks for the beasts now? Perhaps the stories are true. Perhaps your soul is as twisted as the roots in that cursed wood. She had fled them, as she always did, but the howl, it pulled at her, not with fear, but with a terrible, magnetic dread. Something was wrong. The cry had ended in a choked, pained yelp. Leave it. Go home. Their troubles are not yours. You have enough of your own. The sensible voice in her head was shrill. But another voice, quieter and stubborn, remembered the feel of her mother's hand, teaching her that all life, even the frightening kind, held a spark worth tending. Against every shred of self-preservation, Ilara turned toward the river. The Blackwater ran fast and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt even in late spring. The sound of rushing water grew to a roar as she pushed through a thicket of thorny bramble, her dress catching and tearing. And there, in the shallows on the far bank, she saw it. The world seemed to slow, details etching themselves into her mind with impossible clarity. A wolf, but such a wolf! It was colossal, its fur a shock of midnight black against the gray stones, matted and dark with blood that swirled in the current. One of its hind legs was trapped in the jaws of a rusted iron trap, the kind poachers used for bear. The cruel metal teeth had bitten to the bone. Beside it, half submerged, was a snapped sapling. It must have fallen trying to pull free. But it was the eyes that stopped Alara's heart. They found hers across the water, wide and intelligent and burning with a fierce amber gold light. They held no mindless animal rage, only profound agony and a desperate, shocking awareness. This was no beast. This was a prisoner. "Oh no," she breathed, the words stolen by the river's noise. The wolf struggled weakly, a pitiful movement that made the trap jaws clank and fresh blood well. It was drowning, exhaustion and blood loss pulling it under the churning water. It would die here, alone in the cold, because of human cruelty. Every story, every warning screamed in her head. Shadow walker, man-eater, monster. Torvin's face loomed in her mind. But the creature in the water wasn't a monster. It was a living thing in torment, and she was the only one here. Her boots sank into the muddy bank as she stepped into the river. The cold was a physical blow, knocking the air out of her lungs, soaking her skirts instantly and pulling at her with surprising strength. She stumbled, gasping, but pushed forward, her gaze locked on those golden eyes. They watched her, wary but strangely still, as if recognizing her intent. "Easy," she murmured, her voice trembling as much from cold as fear. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just stay still." Reaching the wolf was an eternity. The water was chest deep, numbing her limbs. Up close, its size was truly overwhelming. Its shoulder would come to her chest if it stood. The scent of blood and wet fur, and something wilder like storm wind and pine filled her senses. The wound was ghastly. The trap's teeth were embedded in a mangled mess of flesh and fur. Her numb fingers fumbled with the mechanism. It was old, rusted shut. She pulled, straining, but it wouldn't budge. The wolf flinched, a low whine escaping it. I'm sorry," she chanted, tears of frustration mixing with river water on her face. She needed leverage. She looked around, spotting a sturdy branch caught in the rocks. Wading back, she seized it, returned, and wedged it into the trap's hinge. Using all her weight, she leaned on the branch. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a screech of protesting metal, the jaws groaned and began to open, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. The wolf didn't move. It held its leg perfectly still until the metal teeth cleared the torn flesh, then jerked the limb free with a convulsive shudder. It collapsed sideways into the water, panting, those golden eyes sliding shut for a moment. But the job wasn't done. The leg was broken, bent at a sickening angle. Infection would kill it as surely as the trap. Acting on an instinct she didn't understand, Ilara ripped strips from her already ruined underskirt. Using the branch and her makeshift bandages, she fashioned a crude splint, wrapping it tight to immobilize the shattered bones. She worked quickly, her hands moving with a certainty she didn't feel, talking softly all the time, nonsense words, reassurances, a lifeline of sound in the roaring silence of the forest. As she tied the final knot, a strange warmth bloomed in her chest. It started where her fingers brushed the wet fur, a tingling heat that spread up her arm and settled behind her ribs. It felt like recognition, like two puzzle pieces long separated clicking into place. The wolf's eyes opened. The pain was still there, but beneath it a new intensity burned. It shifted, and with a staggering display of strength, pushed itself up onto 3 legs. Ilara scrambled back, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. This enormous, powerful creature was free. It could turn on her in an instant. But it didn't. It simply stood in the shallows, water streaming from its fur, and looked at her. Really looked at her. Then it did something that erased the last of the world as she knew it. It dipped its massive head slowly, deliberately, and pressed its broad forehead against her own. The contact was electric. The warmth in her chest exploded into a sunburst, a wave of emotion that was not her own, gratitude, awe, a loneliness so profound it mirrored her own, and something else, something ancient and binding, a silent promise. A branch cracked somewhere upstream. The spell broke. The wolf's head snapped up, ears pivoting. It gave her a last searing look, a look that held a universe of unspoken words, then turned and vanished into the thick undergrowth, moving with a 3-legged grace that defied its injury. One moment it was there, a shadow of pain and power. The next it was gone, swallowed by the shadow veil. Ilala stood shivering in the river, utterly alone. The cold rushed back in, a physical and spiritual shock. Her dress was ruined, her hands cut and bruised, her body trembling with delayed terror. But on her skin, where the wolf's forehead had touched hers, a phantom warmth lingered. And in the quiet hollow of her chest, where only loneliness had lived for 3 years, something new had taken root, something that felt dangerously like a bond. She had saved a life, but as she stumbled back to the empty cottage that was not a home, a deep, unsettling certainty grew within her. The stories were true, the wolfkin were real, and she had just entangled her fate with one of them. The howl in the mist was a... For 3 days, Alara moved through her life like a sleepwalker. The village was a cacophony of preparation, the sharpening of blades, the fletching of arrows, the grim boasting of men like Torvin. The hunting party would leave at dawn. The air tasted of iron and impending violence. But in the quiet of her cottage, all she could see were eyes of molten gold. All she could feel was the ghost of that forehead against hers, and the strange, warm anchor it had left in her soul. She jumped at shadows, her ears straining for a sound that never came, the sound of a limping wolf returning. Had it survived? Had her crude aid been enough? Or had it succumbed to its wounds deep in the forest, dying alone because of her clumsy human mercy? Guilt and a bizarre sense of loss warred within her. She told no one. Who would believe her? And if they did, it would only confirm their worst fears about her, Ilara the Blighted, consorter with monsters. On the 3rd night, the full moon rose, a perfect, luminous disk that bathed the world in cold, silver light. Ilara couldn't sleep. She sat by her small window, watching the moon path glitter on the distant black water. The warmth in her chest, which had been a faint ember, began to glow. It wasn't painful, but it was insistent, a gentle tugging beneath her ribs, pulling her gaze toward the dark tree line. And then they came. Shadows detached themselves from the greater darkness beneath the trees, not one, but many. Silhouettes of immense wolves, moving with a silent, predatory grace. They formed a semicircle at the edge of the clearing before her cottage, sitting as still as statues, their eyes gleaming like captured moonlight. At their center was her wolf, the black fur she remembered, the splinted leg held carefully off the ground. But it was not alone. Beside it stood a man. Ilara's breath hitched. He was tall, built with the lean, powerful grace of a forest predator. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and even from this distance, she could see his features were sharp, aristocratic, and etched with an age that didn't match his youthful face. He wore clothing of dark leather and supple hide, marked with patterns that seemed to shift in the moonlight, and his eyes, they reflected the moon's glow not with silver, but with that same familiar, burning amber. The Alpha. The words formed in her mind with absolute certainty. This was no subordinate creature. This was the king of the shadows himself. Fear should have paralyzed her. It should have sent her barricading the door. Instead, that warmth in her chest flared into a beacon, a homing signal. It drew her to her feet. It guided her hand to the latch. It pulled her out into the cold night air, dressed only in her thin night shift. The moment she stepped outside, the world narrowed to him, the man-wolf king. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable, but his golden eyes tracked her every move with an intensity that was both thrilling and terrifying. The pack around him didn't growl, didn't stir. They simply watched, a court of silent witnesses. She stopped a dozen paces away, her bare feet freezing in the dewy grass. The night was utterly silent, as if the very forest was holding its breath. "You saved him." The man's voice was a low rumble, deeper than the river's flow, textured with centuries. "You saved me." The confirmation, hearing it in a human voice, sent a jolt through her. The wolf and the man were one. The awareness she'd seen in the river, it was this. She found her voice, though it was a thinned thread of sound. I couldn't leave you to die. No other of your kind would have made that choice. He took one step forward. The pack tensed, but held their positions. They set traps, they plan hunts, they see only monsters to be destroyed. They're afraid, Ilara whispered, defending the very people who despised her. And you? He took another step, closing the distance between them. The scent of him washed over her, pine, frost, wild earth, and that undeniable power. Are you afraid? She was terrified, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. But beneath the fear, the warmth held steady. Yes, but fear isn't a reason to let something suffer. Something flickered in those ancient eyes, surprise, respect, a crack in the regal armor. What is your name? Ilara. She swallowed. Just Ilara. Ilara. He said her name as if tasting a rare fruit, testing its weight. I am Kael. My people are the Valren. This forest has been our domain since the mountains were young. For 50 of your years, we have lived in shadow, retreating from the axes and arrows of your village, and in all that time, no human hand has been extended in mercy. His gaze bored into hers. Until yours. He closed enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the subtle silver strands in his dark hair. He was immortal, she realized, a king from a storybook, standing in her cabbage patch. Why? He asked, the single word loaded with a weight she couldn't fathom. Why risk yourself for a Valren? She thought of her mother's kindness, of her own aching loneliness, of the simple, unbearable wrongness of watching a living creature die in pain. Because it was right. Kael's lips parted slightly. He looked stricken, as if her simple answer was a key that fit a lock he'd long forgotten existed. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken history. Then his expression shifted, hardening with a grim reality. Your village hunts at dawn. Torvin leads 20 men into the deep wood. They will not stop until they find blood, ours or their own. Ilara's blood ran cold. You have to leave. Go deeper, hide. We have hidden for 50 years. The words were sharp, edged with a frustration so deep it vibrated in the air. Where would you have us go, Ilara? The world beyond this forest has no place for the Valren. This is our home. We will not be driven from it like rats. He mastered himself, the regal mask sliding back into place, but his eyes still blazed. But I am not here for war. Not yet. He reached into the folds of his cloak and drew out an object. It caught the moonlight, a pendant on a leather cord, a smooth, dark stone carved into the shape of a howling wolf, cradled within a setting of woven silver that resembled thorny vines. It was ancient, beautiful, and hummed with a subtle energy she could feel from where she stood. This is a moon mark, he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. When you touched me in the river, something awoke, an old magic, older than the feud between our peoples, a bond of souls that recognizes its mirror, regardless of form. He held the pendant out. Take it. Hesitantly, Ilara reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the cool stone, the warmth in her chest erupted. It was no longer just a feeling, it was a knowing, a flood of sensations not her own, the cool resilience of forest shade, the fierce protectiveness of a leader for his people, the profound, weary loneliness of an immortal king, and beneath it all, a startling, undeniable pull toward her. She gasped, snatching her hand back as if burned. The connection snapped, but the echo remained, thrumming in her veins. Kael's eyes held a mixture of triumph and sorrow. You feel it, the Talia, the soul thread. You are my anima, my fated mate. The words hung in the air, impossible, terrifying. A human and a wolf king? That's
"That can't be. I'm nobody, a cursed village girl. You are the one who saw a king in a trap and called him worthy of salvation. That makes you everything." Before she could process this, he continued, his tone shifting to one of command. "The hunting party changes things. I will give you 1 cycle of the moon, 1 month. Use your position, use this connection. Try to turn your people from their path. Be the bridge your soul seems destined to be. And if I fail?" Her voice was small. Pain flashed in his golden eyes. "Then the shadow veil will run red, and you, he looked at her, and the raw need in his gaze was more frightening than any threat. You will have to choose a side. The bond will not let you stay in between forever. It will pull until it breaks you or claims you." He stepped back, the moment of vulnerability gone, replaced by the alpha once more. 1 month, Ilara, for peace, for us." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned, and in a fluid, mesmerizing motion, his form blurred and reshaped. Bones silently reformed, fur sprouted, and where the man had stood, the great black wolf now stood, the moonmark pendant clutched gently in his teeth. He placed it carefully at her feet, then gave her one last lingering look. With a silent signal, the pack melted back into the forest, shadows returning to shadow. Ilara stood alone, the cold finally seeping into her bones. At her feet, the wolf pendant gleamed in the moonlight, a tiny, impossible promise, or a curse. In the distance, the first faint gray of false dawn touched the sky. In a few hours, Torvin and his men would march, and she, Ilara,
The walk back to her cottage felt like moving through a dream. The moonmark pendant lay heavy in her palm, its weight far exceeding its physical size. It was a key, Kaylin had said, a confirmation, and it was burning a hole through her reality. Dawn broke, pale and cold. From her window, Ilara watched the hunting party assemble in the square. Torvin at the front, a bear of a man with a polished axe. 20 others, faces set in masks of grim determination or poorly concealed fear. They carried the village's best weapons, notched swords, hunting bows, spears with iron tips. They looked like an army marching to siege a castle, not men tracking animals. The sight made her stomach clench. As they disappeared down the forest road, a profound sense of failure washed over her. She had 1 month, 30 days, to dismantle 50 years of hatred, and she had just let 20 armed men walk into the Vulrans' territory. She was the worst possible bridge. The warmth in her chest, the talia, gave a gentle throb. It wasn't a reprimand, but a reminder. It was still there. The connection was real, and with it came a strange new sensation, a tugging, not just emotional, but directional. It was faint, like a whisper on the wind, but it pulled insistently toward the northwest, deep into the shadow veil. Kaylin? He was calling her, or the bond was. The sensible choice was to stay, to try to reason with the villagers who remained, the women, the elderly, the few men too young or too old to hunt, to be the voice of peace from the safety of the village. But the pendant in her hand seemed to pulse in time with the tug in her soul. He had given her a task, but he also offered her a truth. To be a bridge, she had to understand both sides. She knew the village's fear intimately. She knew nothing of the Vulran, of their home, their hearts. How could she speak for them if she'd never seen them? The decision crystallized with a sudden, terrifying clarity. She had to go to them, to the heart of the shadow veil. Packing was simple: a waterskin, a heel of hard bread, her warmest shawl, and the moon-mark pendant tucked safely inside her dress. She left her cottage without a backward glance. There was nothing there to hold her. The forest welcomed her differently this time. The mist was thinner, the shadows less menacing. It was as if the trees themselves recognized the token she carried, the thread that connected her to their king. The directional pull grew stronger, a compass in her blood. She walked for hours, following deer trails and dry creek beds, moving deeper than she had ever had before. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the ancient language of the woods, the sigh of wind in high branches, the chatter of unseen creatures, the distant chuckle of water. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and orange, the forest changed. The trees grew larger, their trunks wider than cottages, their canopies blocking out the sky. Luminescent moss clung to bark, casting an eerie green glow. The air grew still and heavy, charged with a latent energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. This was the deep wood, the true shadow veil. And then, she was not alone. Shadows coalesced beside her, around her. Valren in wolf form, their fur shades of gray, brown, and smoky black. They didn't growl, they didn't threaten, they simply emerged from the twilight and fell into step with her, two flanking her sides, one leading, another trailing behind. An escort, or guards, she couldn't tell. Her heart hammered, but the Talia thrummed with a sense of welcome. These wolves were an extension of Kaylin's will. They were bringing her home. The lead wolf, a massive gray with intelligent silver eyes, glanced back at her and gave a soft chuff. It was somehow encouraging. They led her to a sheer rock face, thick with ivy. The gray wolf nosed at a specific spot, and with a soft grating sound, a section of the rock, cleverly disguised as part of the cliff, swaying inward, a hidden passage. Inside, the world opened up. Ilara's breath caught. She stood at the edge of a vast hidden valley nestled within the mountains. It was a cradle of life, protected on all sides by towering stone walls. A central lake reflected the darkening sky, and around it sprawled a settlement that was both utterly alien and breathtakingly beautiful. These were not crude dens. Structures were woven into the very fabric of the valley, dwellings built into the sides of ancient hollow trees, their doors carved with intricate knotwork. Platforms connected by graceful rope bridges swayed high in the canopy. Caves in the rock face showed the soft glow of firelight from within, their openings framed by living vines and flowers she'd never seen before. It was a city of nature and cunning, a testament to a culture that was deeply connected to its world. And there were Valren everywhere, in wolf form, lounging by the lake, in human form, tending small gardens, working leather, teaching children. The children, a mix of human-looking toddlers and playful wolf pups, chased each other around the central fire, their laughter echoing brightly. This wasn't a monster's lair, this was a community, a family. All activity ceased as she entered, escorted by her silent guards. Dozens of pairs of eyes, human and wolf, turned to her. The air grew thick with silence, then a low hum of tense whispers. I saw curiosity, sharp suspicion, outright hostility. She was an intruder in their last sanctuary. Then a path cleared through the crowd. Kaylin walked towards her. He was in human form, dressed in simpler leathers than the night before, but no less regal. His expression was unreadable, but his golden eyes held hers, and the talia between them stretched taut and sang with recognition. The sheer force of his presence, the relief of seeing him, momentarily stole her voice. He stopped before her. The entire valley waited. "You came," he said. His voice was quieter than last night, meant only for her, but it carried in the stillness. "The bond, it pulled me," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It has a will of its own. He then turned to his people, his voice rising, clear and commanding. "This is Ilara. She walked into the black water to free me from the human trap. She bears no weapon. She comes under the peace of the Talia. She is under my protection, and by the old laws, the protection of the pack." The declaration rippled through the crowd.
An older woman with stern features and iron-gray hair braided tightly stepped forward. This, Ilara sensed, was someone of importance, a beta perhaps. Kaelin, Lyra's voice was respectful but firm. An alpha's word is law, but the heart has been hidden since the great betrayal. Bringing a human here risks everything we have protected. The humans are already in the forest, Lyra, Kaelin countered, his tone patient but unyielding. Hiding has not stopped their axes from getting closer each year. Ilara represents another path. She is the anima the legends spoke of, the bridge. Lyra's sharp eyes swept over Ilara, assessing, doubtful. A bridge must be strong enough to bear the weight from both sides. Is she? Before Kaelin could answer, a young Valren male in human form pushed to the front. He was handsome in a sharp, fierce way, with eyes that held a perpetual challenge. She's a village girl. She smells of their fear and their rot. The Talia can be a trick, a human witch's spell. Silence, Corin. Kaelin's voice cracked like a whip, his alpha power surging for a second, pressing down on the clearing. The young male flinched, but held his glare. Kaelin mastered his anger. The Talia cannot be falsified. You know this. The moon mark confirmed it. He turned back to Ilara, his gaze softened a fraction. Come, you are weary. He led her away from the staring crowd, towards the largest of the tree dwellings, set against the great trunk of a monarch oak. Inside, it was warm and spacious, lit by bioluminescent fungi in wall niches. Pelts covered a sleeping platform, and simple, beautiful carvings decorated the walls. This is my place, Kaelin said. You will stay here. Where will you stay? The question left her lips before she could stop it. A shadow of his earlier, almost smile returned. Nearby, the bond, it prefers closeness, especially when new. He gestured to a pile of furs. Rest. Lyra will bring food. We will talk more when you've recovered. He left her then, and the sudden absence of his potent presence made the room feel emptier. Ilara sank on the furs, her mind reeling. The hidden valley, the proud, suspicious people, the undeniable reality of their civilization, it was overwhelming. They weren't monsters. They were a nation in exile, in their own land. Lyra arrived with a wooden bowl of stew, rich with herbs and tender meat.
The rhythm of life in the heart of the Shadow Vale was alien and mesmerizing. Ilara woke to the sound of birdsong echoing in the stone bowl of the valley, not the crowing of roosters. The air was clean and crisp, scented with pine, damp earth, and the smoke from morning cook-fires. Kaelin was waiting for her outside the dwelling, holding 2 wooden cups of steaming tea. He looked more relaxed in the morning light, though the weight of his station was always present in the set of his shoulders. "You slept," he observed, handing her a cup. "Surprisingly well," she admitted. The furs had been deep, the sounds of the pack settling for the night a strangely comforting murmur. "The bond settles the spirit," he said simply. "Come, I would show you our home." Their walk through the valley was a silent spectacle. Valeren paused in their tasks to watch them pass. The curiosity was still there, the suspicion, but now mixed with something else, a hesitant awe. The Alpha walking with his claimed human anima was a living legend, a scene from the oldest tales. He showed her the singing springs, where water bubbled up over musical stones, the grove of memory trees, where the history of the pack was carved into living bark in a language of symbols and pictures, the weaving dens, where Valeren women crafted fabrics from spider silk and moss wool, materials stronger and softer than any village linen. Everywhere, Ilara saw not just survival, but culture, art, music, knowledge. It dismantled the village's monster myth brick by brick. In a quiet corner by the lake, where willows trailed their fingers in the water, Kaelin finally spoke of the past. The great betrayal was 52 years ago.
he began, his gaze distant, fixed on the water. A human child, a little girl from the village, wandered into the wood. She fell into a ravine. My father, the alpha then, found her. She was alive, but her leg was broken. He brought her here, to the heart, to be healed by our wise women. Alara listened, her heart beginning to ache with foreknowledge. We nursed her for a week, Kalen continued, his voice growing taut. She was a bright thing, fearless. She played with our pups. My father grew fond of her. When she was well, he led her back to the forest's edge, close enough to see the village smoke. He watched her run home. He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the lake's surface. It jumped 7 times before sinking. 2 days later, he said, the words dropping like stones themselves, a mob came, led by the child's father and the village elder of that time. They said we had stolen her, that we were blood drinkers, changelings. They said she was touched by darkness and spoke nightmares of fangs and fur. They did not wait for truth. They attacked a patrol on the border. 4 Valoran died. 1 was my younger brother. The grief in his voice was fresh, sharp, an open wound that 50 years had not healed. Alara's hand moved of its own accord, covering his where it rested on the grass. The Talia flared, humming with shared sorrow. Kalen looked down at their hands, then up at her, his golden eyes vulnerable. My father wanted vengeance. He wanted to sweep down on the village and wipe it from the map. My younger then, more tempestuous, I agreed with him, but my mother, she was the voice of the Talia. She said to answer hatred with greater hatred was to become the monster they feared. She pleaded for retreat, for preservation. We argued. The pack was divided. He took a shaky breath. That night, my father and a band of his loyalists launched their own attack on the village. It was a slaughter, on both sides. He was killed by a lucky arrow. My mother, her heart broke with the shattering of the peace. She faded within the year. I became alpha, crowned in grief and blood, with a pack torn in 2. I chose my mother's path. We retreated. We hid the heart. We became ghosts in our own forest, letting the humans believe they had won, letting the legend of the vicious shadow walkers grow to keep them away. The story hung between them, a tragedy of misunderstanding and fear. Alara understood now the depth of the wound, the reason for Lyra's suspicion, Corin's anger. This wasn't just about territory, it was about trust annihilated, family lost. The child, Alara asked softly, what happened to her? A shadow crossed Kalen's face. She became the village wise woman, Old Nan. Alara recoiled. Old Nan, the one who croaked about blood debts and shadow walkers, the one whose stories fueled the current fear. The little girl, saved by the Valoran, had grown up to demonize them. Had the fall twisted her memory, or had the village's fear rewritten her truth? She never spoke of the healing, of the week she spent here. She spoke of imprisonment and terror. The story that served the village's need for an enemy was the one that survived. The injustice of it burned in Alara's chest. We have to make them see. We have to tell them the truth. Truth is a fragile weapon against a fortress of belief. Your Torvin does not want truth. He wants an enemy to unite his people, to make him feel strong. Fear is a simpler fuel than understanding. Then we find a different fuel, Alara insisted, the stubborn fire that had driven her into the river rekindling. We show them what they're actually threatening, not monsters, but this. She gestured to the peaceful valley, the playing children, the intricate, beautiful dwellings. Kalen watched her, the sorrow in his eyes gradually replaced by a dawning, cautious hope. You would do that? You would stand before your people and speak for us? They're not my people, Alara said, the truth of the words surprising her. They cast me out long ago, but they don't have to be your enemies either. She squeezed his hand. You gave me a month. I intend to use it." For the first time, a true, unguarded smile touched Kalen's lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. The bond between them swelled with a warmth that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with a connection being forged in shared purpose. That afternoon, Alara asked Lyra to teach her, not just Valoran ways, but practical things. She learned which herbs in the valley had potent healing properties, unknown to the village. She learned how the Valoran tracked game without disturbing the forest balance. She listened to the elders tell the true stories of the old peace, of shared healing for metalwork, of Valoran scouts guiding lost villagers, of shared festivals under the harvest moon. She was building her case, gathering her evidence. But the outside world would not wait. A scout returned just before dusk, shifting to human form in a rush of energy before Kalen. He was breathless. "Alpha, the hunting party, they've split. Torvin and 10 men continue east, chasing false trails. But a second group, 5, led by the younger one, Rorik, they've broken off. They're heading north, towards the Silent Falls." Kalen went very still. "The falls are less than a day's walk from here. The caves there are where we shelter the youngest pups and their mothers during the solstice," Lyra finished, her face pale. "They go there tomorrow for the star dance ceremony." A cold dread poured through Alara. The star dance was a sacred Valoran rite for the new season. It would be a gathering of the most vulnerable. Corin, who had been lurking nearby, strode forward, his face alight with furious vindication. "You see, he told you. The human comes, and suddenly the hunters find a path towards our heart. She is a spy, a beacon." "Enough, Corin," Kalen roared, his alpha power flaring, a physical pressure that made Alara stagger. "She has been under watch every moment. She has sent no signals." But the damage was done. Suspicious eyes turned towards Alara. The fragile trust she'd begun to build wavered. "It doesn't matter how they found the direction," Lyra said, her voice urgent and practical. "They are heading for the pup caves. We have hours, maybe less, to move them or divert the hunters." Kalen's gaze swept from Corin's triumphant lair to Lyra's worry, finally landing on Alara. In his eyes, she saw the terrible conflict, the leader who must protect his people, and the man who had begun to believe in a bridge. Alara's mind raced. Rorik, she knew him, a decent young man, Torvin's nephew, more follower than leader. He was not evil, just scared and eager to prove himself. An idea, desperate and dangerous, formed. "Let me go," she said, the words clear in the tense silence. Every Valoran stared at her. "Let me go to them, to Rorik's group. I can talk to him. I can turn them back." "It is a suicide," Lyra stated flatly. "They won't kill me on sight," Alara argued, though she wasn't sure it was true. "I'm a village girl. I can say I got lost, that I saw something. I can lead them away from the falls. And if you fail, if they capture you, torture you for information about us," Corin sneered. The Talia twisted inside her, a spike of protective fear that was not her own.
The forest at twilight was a world of long, grasping shadows and deceptive silence. Alara moved as quickly as she dared toward the Silent Falls, the pendant cold, reassuring weight against her skin. The Talia was a live wire in her chest, a constant low-grade hum of connection that pointed unerringly to Kalen's presence somewhere to her left, a silent guardian in the canopy. Lyra had given her a quick, brutal lesson in tracking. "They move like men who think they are hunters but are really just noisy trespassers," she'd said, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Look for snapped branches at waist height. Listen for the clank of metal they don't know how to silence." Alara found the trail sooner than she expected. A boot print in a patch of soft mud, the edges still crumbling. A strip of rough-woven cloth snagged on a thorn bush, the same fabric the village men wore. Her stomach churned. They were close. She followed the signs, her senses stretched taut. The sound of the falls grew from a whisper to a distant roar. And then she heard them, muffled voices, tense and low. Peering through a screen of young fir trees, she saw them, 5 men. Rorik, tall and lean, his face pinched with anxiety, held the lead. The others were villagers she knew by sight, a carpenter's son, 2 farmhands, old Jory's boy. They looked exhausted, scared, and utterly out of their depth. They held their spears like unfamiliar tools. This was her moment. She took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the Talia pulse once, a surge of courage that felt like a hand squeezing hers. Then she stepped out into the small clearing where they'd paused to check a crude map. 5 weapons snapped up, pointed at her heart. 5 faces registered shock, then confusion, then dawning hostility. Alara? Rorik lowered his spear a fraction, his brow furrowed. By the gods, what are you doing out here? Are you mad? The woods are crawling with... I know, she interrupted, keeping her voice calm, her hands visible at her sides. I came to find you, to warn you. Warn us? One of the farmhands, Darren, scoffed. From what? The big bad wolves? We're hunting them, girl. You're hunting in the wrong place, Alara said, forcing conviction into her words. The main pack, the big ones, they're east where Torvin is. You're heading toward the Silent Falls. There's nothing there but rock and water. Dangerous rock. There are crevices hidden by moss. Men have been lost forever in that maze. She saw the doubt flicker in Rorik's eyes. He was in over his head and he knew it. How would you know? Jory's boy Micah challenged, his voice squeaking with bravado. You're just the blighted girl who talks to herself in the garden. I know because I listen, Alara shot back, a spark of her old defiance igniting. I listen to the forest, and it's screaming that you're on a fool's path. You're tired, you're lost. Your only prize out here will be a broken neck. She's lying, Darren growled. She's always been odd. Torvin said she might be in league with them. Maybe she's leading us away from them on purpose. The accusation hung in the air. Rorik's eyes narrowed. Is that true, Alara? Did they send you? The Shadow Walkers? The directness of the question, the fear in his voice, was a weapon she hadn't expected. She couldn't tell the truth, but she couldn't let them go to the falls. I'm trying to save your lives, her voice cracking with genuine emotion. Please, Rorik, turn back, go south, rejoin Torvin. This path, it only leads to grief. For a moment, she thought he had him. His shoulders slumped, indecision warring on his face. Then a new sound cut through the forest murmur. Not a howl, a child's laugh, high, bright, and utterly out of place in the deep wood. It came from the direction of the falls. Every man froze. The blood drained from Alara's face. The pup caves. The Valoran children must have arrived early for the star dance. Did you hear that? Micah whispered, his eyes wide. A child? Darren breathed, his superstitious fear morphing into something darker. It's a trick, a spirit, or... His eyes locked on Alara with dawning horrific understanding. Or it's their young. The monsters have young. Rorik's face hardened, all disindecision gone, replaced by a hunter's grim resolve. She was leading us away. They're nesting at the falls. Their spawn are there. He raised his spear, pointing it not at Alara, but past her, toward the sound. That's the true prize, not some old wolf. We cut the root, the tree dies. No! Alara screamed, throwing herself in front of their path. You don't understand. They're not monsters. They're children. Her plea was her undoing. It confirmed everything they feared. Seize her, Rorik ordered, his voice cold. Darren and Micah grabbed her arms, their grips bruising. She fought, but they were too strong. They forced her to her knees. You're coming with us, witch, Darren hissed in her ear. You'll show us exactly where their den is, and maybe, if you're helpful, we won't leave you for them when we're done. Despair flooded Alara. She had failed. Worse, she had led them closer. The Talia in her chest was a storm of fear-laced rage, Kaelin's emotions bleeding through the bond.
She could feel him nearby, a coiled spring of violence waiting to be unleashed. As the men dragged her forward, a low growl vibrated through the earth, a sound so deep and menacing it seemed to come from the forest itself. It was not the growl of a single wolf, but a chorus. From the shadows of the trees, eyes ignited, amber, silver, glacial blue. Dozens of them. The Valren had abandoned stealth. They flowed into the clearing like living smoke, wolves of impossible size and silent lethality. They didn't attack, they simply formed a wall of muscle, fur, and bared teeth between the hunters and the path to the falls. At their head stood Kalen. He was in human form, a decision that was somehow more terrifying. He stood unarmed, his hands loose at his sides, but the power radiating from him was a tangible force. His golden eyes burned with a cold, ancient fire as they took in the scene. Alara on her knees, held by the villagers. "Release her." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decree, echoing with an alpha's command that made the air tremble. The hunters stumbled back, their bravado shattering. They were facing not beasts, but a man who was more, a king. Darren's grip on Alara loosened in his shock. "Demon!" Rorik shouted, his voice shrill with terror. He raised his spear, not at the wolves, but at Alara's exposed back. "This is your doing, your magic!" Time seemed to slow. Alara saw the spear tip gleam in the dying light. She saw Kalen's eyes widen, his body coil to spring. She saw the other Valoran wolves snarl, ready to surge forward into a bloodbath. This was the edge, the moment the bridge would burn and the war would begin in earnest. With a strength born of pure desperation, Alara wrenched her arm free from Micah's slackened grip. She didn't try to run. Instead, she twisted, throwing herself not away from Rorik's spear, but sideways into the path of the other hunters, disrupting their aim. "Stop!" The word tore from her throat, raw and powerful, fueled by the Talia, by her fear for both sides. "Rorik, look at them! Look!" Her movement, her scream, created a fractured second of hesitation. Rorik's spear wavered. His eyes, following her command, scanned the line of Valoran. He saw not mindless savagery, but intelligent, focused fury. He saw the way they protected the path behind them. He saw Kalen, a ruler defending his territory and his... what? His captive? His ally? "They're protecting their home," Alara gasped, scrambling to her feet, putting herself physically between the two groups. "Just like you would. They have children back there, families. Please, don't make this the day you become the monster you're hunting." The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant roar of the falls and the ragged breathing of terrified men. The Valren held their position, a silent, deadly promise. Rorik's spear point slowly lowered until it pointed to the ground. His face was a mask of confusion, horror, and dawning, sickening realization. He looked from Alara's pleading face to Kalen's imposing stillness, to the wall of majestic, terrifying wolves. "Gods," he breathed, the fight draining out of him. He wasn't a hero facing monsters. He was a lost man about to butcher children because of a story. "Go," Kalen said, his voice like grinding stone. "Go and take your men. Follow the setting sun. You will find the edge of the wood. Tell your elder what you saw here. Tell them the Shadow Vale is not empty and its guardians are done hiding." It wasn't an offer. It was a pardon. Shamefaced, trembling, the 5 men needed no further urging. They turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth back the way they'd come, leaving their pride and their preconceptions shattered on the forest floor. The moment they were gone, the tension snapped. Kalen was at Alara's side in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face, his eyes scanning her for injuries. The Talia overflowed with a torrent of fear-laced relief, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "You foolish, brave, impossible woman," he murmured, his thumb brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Behind him, the Valoran wolves shifted. Lyra, in human form now, approached.
The heart of the Shadow Vale was different after the confrontation at the falls. A subtle shift had occurred in the atmosphere around Alara. The suspicious glances from the Valren were now tinged with a wary curiosity, and in some cases, like Lyra's, a nascent respect. She was no longer just the Alpha's strange human obsession. She was the woman who had faced down armed hunters to protect their young. Kaelin rarely left her side. The Italia bond, strained and supercharged during the crisis, had settled into a deeper, more constant hum. She could feel the echo of his emotions, a steady undercurrent of protective vigilance, a simmering anger at the threat that had come so close, and a profound, grateful warmth when his eyes rested on her. It was intrusive and comforting all at once, like sharing a room with a beating second heart. 3 days after the hunters' retreat, a scout brought word. Rorik's group had stumbled back to the village, half dead from fear and exhaustion. Their story was not a unified shout, but a discordant babble that had set the village square ablaze with gossip. "They speak of a demon king in man's skin," the scout reported, a young Valren named Fen with keen eyes. "Of wolves as big as horses that moved like ghosts, and of the blighted girl, standing between them, unharmed. Some say she commanded the beasts, others say she was their prisoner. The village is divided, Alpha, confused." "And Torvin?" Kaelin asked, his voice deceptively calm. Furious, he calls Rorik a coward, his men fools addled by swamp gas and shadows. He says the true pack awaits him in the east, and that Alara is a diversion, a witch sent to weaken their resolve. He plans to rally the remaining men and push deeper. He says he will bring back wolf pelts or not return at all. A cold knot formed in Alara's stomach. Torvin's pride was wounded. He would double down, not back down. The crack Rorik's experience had made in the village's certainty was being plastered over with louder shouts of denial. "We have to do more," Alara said, rising from where she sat by the fire. "We have to speak to them directly, not through scared boys, not through rumors. We have to show them." "Show them what?" Corin's voice cut in from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his arms crossed. "Our fangs? Our strength? A display would only prove we are the monsters they fear." "Not that," Alara said, turning to face him. "Show them you're not monsters. Show them the truth Rorik glimpsed, but was too frightened to understand." "And how do you propose we do that, human?" Corin's tone was less hostile than it had been, but still deeply skeptical. "March into their square? They would fill us with arrows before we spoke a word." "No," Alara said, an idea crystallizing with sudden, clear urgency. "We invite them here." A stunned silence filled the dwelling. Even Kaelin looked at her as if she'd suggested they dance naked in the village square. "You cannot be serious," Lyra said, her voice flat. "Hear me out," Alara pleaded, her words tumbling out. "Torvin is leading the willing to war, but the village isn't just Torvin. There are others, the elderly who remember whispers of the old peace, mothers afraid for their sons, people like Father Alden, the priest, who values life over pride. We invite them, a delegation, under a flag of truce, to a neutral place at the edge of the forest. We show them the heart is not a den of horrors. We show them the children, the gardens, the carvings. We let them see a people, not a pestilence." "It is an enormous risk," Kaelin said slowly, but she could feel the spark of interest in him through the bond. The strategist in him was evaluating. "If it fails, we reveal the location of our home to our enemies." "The location is already compromised," Alara argued. "Rorik's group came close. Torvin may yet stumble upon it. Secrecy has kept you safe, but it has also fed the myth. It's time to replace the myth with reality, controlled reality." "And who would you invite?"
Lyra asked, her practical mind already working. How do we get a message to the reasonable ones without Torvin intercepting it and using it as proof of a trap? Alara thought of the one person in the village who had ever shown her a fragment of kindness, the one who might listen. Father Alden. He visits the outlying farms every week to tend the sick. A scout could intercept him alone, deliver the invitation, a written pledge of safe conduct signed by... She hesitated, then looked at Kaelin. By the Alpha King of the Valren. The title hung in the air. Kaelin held her gaze, his golden eyes searching hers. He saw her desperation, her conviction, her stubborn, foolish hope. He saw the bridge she was trying to build, plank by plank. The Alpha does not beg for peace from those who trespass on his land, Corin growled, the old defiance flaring. He doesn't beg, Kaelin corrected, his voice firm, his eyes never leaving Alara's. He offers it from a position of strength, not weakness. We turned their hunters without shedding a drop of blood. That is our strength. The offer of truce is an extension of that mercy. He stood, his decision made. We will do it. Lyra, craft the message. Fen, you know the priest's roots. Intercept him tomorrow. Be respectful. Alara, you will write the message. Your hand, your words will lend it credibility. The trust in his words stole her breath. He was risking everything on her judgment, on her connection to a world that had rejected her. The message was simple, written on a scrap of treated bark with ink crushed from berries and charcoal. Father Alden, you once gave bread to a hungry girl others called cursed. I ask you now to look past curses again. The people of the Shadow Vale are not what stories say. They wish no war. The Alpha King, Kaelin, offers a truce and a chance for understanding. He invites you, and 2 others of your choosing who seek peace, to meet at the stone circle where the old oak fell, at dusk 3 days from now. You will be met and escorted under full protection. No weapons, no treachery. Come and see the truth with your own eyes. Alara. Fen departed with the scroll at first light. The weight was agony. Alara threw herself into helping prepare the neutral ground, a clearing a half-hour's walk from the heart, where a ring of ancient moss-covered stones stood. They cleared no brush, set no traps. They would come as they were. 2 days later, Fen returned, his expression unreadable. The priest took the scroll. He read it many times. He asked no questions of me. He only said, "Tell her I will consider it." That is all. Consider it. Not yes, not no. The uncertainty was a new kind of torture. On the appointed day, as the sun began its descent, tension in the heart was a live thing. Kaelin selected the escort carefully, Lyra for her wisdom, Fen for her speed, and himself, in human form, to present a leader's face. He insisted Alara come, the living proof of the invitation's origin. A contingent of warriors would remain hidden in the trees, a silent insurance policy. They reached the stone circle as the first stars pricked the twilight sky. The clearing was empty. The minutes stretched. Doubt gnawed at Alara. Had it been a mistake? Had Father Alden shown the scroll to Torvin? Was this the trap Corin had feared? Then, a rustle at the far tree line. 3 figures emerged. Father Alden, his robes seeming too large for his frail frame, his face pale but composed. Beside him was Marcus, the village's only herbalist, a quiet, observant man Alara's mother had sometimes traded with. And between them, holding a lantern with a trembling hand, was Rorik. Alara's heart leapt into her throat. Rorik! He had come! The 2 groups faced each other across 20 paces of grassy clearing, the Valren powerful and still, the villagers small and mortal, and brave beyond measure. Father Alden stepped forward, his eyes finding Alara. "Child," he said, his voice thin but steady. "You are well?" "I am, Father," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. His gaze then shifted to Kaelin, and the old priest flinched just once at the sheer presence of the Alpha King, but he held his ground. "You are Kaelin?" "I am," Kaelin said, his voice low, devoid of threat, but full of authority. "You are welcome under the terms of the truce. Your courage honors this meeting." "It is not courage that brings us, but desperation," Marcus the herbalist spoke, his sharp eyes taking in Lyra, Fen, the unnatural stillness of the forest around them. "Our village bleeds young men into this feud. We would see if another path exists." Rorik said nothing. He stared at the ground, his face a battleground of shame and
The days that followed the delegation's visit were a strange interlude of tense hope. In the heart, a cautious optimism bloomed. Valrin, who had never spoken to Alara, now nodded as she passed. Pups dared to approach her, sniffing her hands with wet noses before darting away, giggling. She was becoming part of the tapestry. But the Talia bond told a different story. Kaelin's surface calm was a mask over a deep, churning unease. Through their connection, Alara felt it, the constant, low-grade vigilance of a general waiting for the other boot to drop. He spent hours in council with Lyra and the scouts, his brow permanently furrowed. "Torvin has returned to the village," Fen reported one evening, his expression grim. Empty-handed. He found no pack to slaughter in the east, only old trails and silence. His failure has made him a laughingstock among some, but it has made him desperate, and a desperate man with a sharp axe is more dangerous than a confident one. "What is he doing?" Kaelin asked, his voice like granite. "Rallying," Lyra said, folding her arms. "He's not talking about hunting wolves anymore. He's talking about purging a blight. He's using Rorik's story, twisting it. He says the Demon King has bewitched our people, that he uses illusions to make his den look like a paradise to fool the weak-minded. He says Father Alden and the others were enchanted." Alara's hope curdled. Of course, Torvin wouldn't accept a truth that undermined his authority. He would warp it into a greater lie. "And the village?" Kaelin's question was quiet. "Divided," Fen admitted. "The priest and the herbalist have their followers, mostly women, elders, craftsmen, but Torvin has the hot-headed youths, the men who feel their pride wounded, those who profit from fear. The blacksmith is forging new blades day and night." A cold dread settled in Alara's bones. They had shown truth, and truth had only armed their enemy with a new narrative. The bridge felt slender, swaying over a rising flood. "We must be ready," Kaelin said, the words final. "He will come, not as a hunter, but as a crusader, and he will bring fire." Preparations began in earnest. The Valoran were not a warlike people, but they were formidable defenders. Scouts were doubled. The hidden entrances to the valley were reinforced with clever, natural-looking obstacles. The very young and old were moved to the deepest, most secure caves. The air in the heart, once serene, now thrummed with a quiet, purposeful energy. Alara refused to be a bystander. She learned from Lyra how to make poultices for wounds, how to tie pressure bandages. She helped store food and water in the secondary shelters. She was determined to be an asset, not a liability. One afternoon, as she was sorting medicinal herbs with Lyra, Corin approached. He had been avoiding her since the delegation, his conflict visible in his stiff posture. "Human," he said, the word no longer a sneer but a flat acknowledgement. "Corin." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "The Alpha, he trusts you with the safety of the heart, with his self." Alara waited, saying nothing. "I do not understand the Talia," his pride clearly costing him. "But I saw you at the falls. You did not flinch. You put yourself in the path of the spear for pups not your own." He met her eyes, his own a stormy gray. "If the human attack comes, you will stand with the pack?" The question was a test, and a profound one. It wasn't about fighting, she couldn't. It was about allegiance. "This is my home," Alara said, the truth of it resonating in every fiber of her being. "You are my people.
I will stand." Corin held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a single sharp nod. It was as close to acceptance as she would get from him. He turned and left, his pace less aggressive than usual. That night, under a moon that was a mere sliver of silver, the Talia grew restless. Alara lay beside Kaelin on the sleeping platform. They had taken to sharing the space, the bond craving the closeness, though their intimacy remained a tender, chaste thing of held hands and quiet conversations. Tonight, she could feel a turmoil in him that sleep wouldn't touch. "What is it?" she whispered into the darkness. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, rough and vulnerable. "I have led my people into hiding for 50 years. It kept them alive, but it also made us ghosts in our own land. Now, because I showed a moment of mercy by a river, and because I dared to hope because of you, I may have led them to the brink of annihilation." The weight of his guilt was a physical pressure in her own chest. "You led them to hope," she corrected, turning to face him. In the dim fungal light, his profile was etched with worry. "You're leading them to fight for their home, not just hide from it. There's a difference." "Is there?" he asked, the ancient fatigue in his voice heartbreaking. "When the arrows fly, will hope matter?" She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. The contact sent a soothing pulse through the bond, for both of them. "Yes," she said, with a conviction she borrowed from the bond itself. "Because we're not hiding anymore, we're standing together, and I'd rather stand with you in a fight for tomorrow than hide with you in a perpetual yesterday." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips, and pressed a kiss to her palm. The gesture was so tender it stole her breath. "You are the bravest thing in this forest, Alara," he murmured against her skin. The moment was shattered by a sound that was not part of the night, a distant metallic clang followed by the faint, acrid scent of smoke on the wind. They were both on their feet in an instant. A heartbeat later, a sentry howl echoed through the valley, not a cry of alarm, but a specific, urgent pattern. Intruders, Eastern Ridge, armed, with fire. He had come. Torvin hadn't waited for a full moon or a council vote. He had come in the dark, with steel and flame. Kaelin's vulnerability vanished, replaced by the Alpha King. His eyes glowed in the dark. "Stay with Lyra at the healing den," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Do not come to the walls. Promise me." She wanted to argue, to be at his side, but she saw the fear for her beneath his command. The bond screamed with it. "I promise," she whispered. He cupped her face, kissed her forehead fiercely, and was gone, shifting into his wolf form mid-stride as he burst from the dwelling. Alara rushed to follow his command, her heart hammering a war drum in her ears. As she ran towards the prepared cave that served as the infirmary, she saw the heart transform. Valoran moved with preternatural quiet and speed. Warriors, both human-formed and wolf, flowed toward the eastern rock wall. Others shepherded the last of the children into hiding. There was no panic, only a lethal, focused readiness. Alara refused to be a bystander. She helped Lyra sort supplies and wounds. She did everything she could. Then she studied the bond. From beyond the valley walls came a cacophony of human shouts, the thud of axes against wood, the false barriers, and the chilling crackle of fire. A glow began to paint the eastern rim of the valley orange. They were trying to burn the vines covering the entrance. An answering chorus of deep, challenging growls rolled from the Valoran defenders, a sound meant to freeze blood. There was a scream, cut short. The clash had begun. Minutes later, the first wounded were brought in, a Valoran warrior with a deep gash across his shoulder from an axe, his fur matted with blood. Alara pushed her fear aside, letting Lyra's calm instructions guide her hands. She cleaned, she packed, she bounded. More came, a burn from a flung torch, an arrow wound. Through all of it, the Talia was a storm in her chest. She felt bursts of Kaelin's focused rage, his tactical calculations, the sharp sting of a blade grazing his flank. They felt the collective determination of the pack, their unity a solid wall against the invaders' chaotic aggression, and their restraint. They were disabling, maiming, driving back, but not killing, not unless they had to. Kaelin was holding to his mercy, even in the heat of battle. But the attackers showed no such restraint. The smell of smoke grew stronger. A new sound joined the fray, the hungry roar of fire finding real purchase. They had broken through a secondary screen and set the dry foliage at the upper edge of the valley ablaze. Panic, sharp and acrid, flickered through the bond. Not just hers. The fire was the one weapon they couldn't fight with tooth and claw. It could consume the entire heart. Lyra looked up from a wound, her face grim. They'll burn the sky. Alara finished tying a bandage and stood up, her hands stained red. She looked at the cave entrance, at the ominous glow reflecting on the stone, at the terrified faces of the Valoran children huddled in the back. The promise she made to Kaelin warred with a deeper vow, to protect this home. She knew then what she had to do. It was a desperate, likely suicidal gamble, but bridges weren't just for crossing in peace. Sometimes they were the only path into the storm. "Lyra," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I need you to create a diversion, a big one, at the main entrance." Lyra stared at her. "What are you going to do?" Alara's fingers found the moonmark pendant beneath her dress. It felt warm, charged with the energy of the bond, of the battle. "I'm going to talk to Torvin. You'll be killed." "Maybe," Alara admitted, "but that fire reaches the ancient trees. Everyone will be. He came for me as much as for you. The witch. Let me give him his target. While he's focused on me, your warriors can flank them, put out the fires." It was madness, but Lyra, the pragmatic beta, saw the brutal logic. A leader's mate, a human, walking out would be a shock they could use. She weighed the life of one human against the lives of the entire heart. Her face twisted in agony, but she gave a single, sharp nod. It was as close to acceptance as she would get from him. "Go," she said. "I will give the signal. May the Talia guide you." Alara did not look back. She ran from the cave, not towards the safety of the deeper tunnels, but
The path to the eastern breach was a nightmare of smoke and chaos. The air grew hot and thick, stinging her eyes and clawing at her throat. The beautiful, luminescent moss was blackened and dying. Through the haze, she saw flashes of the battle, the sleek, powerful forms of Valran wolves moving like shadows, the bulky, frantic shapes of men swinging axes and torches. She could feel Kaelin nearby, a blazing sun of fury and power in her mind. He was holding the line at the main breach, a whirlwind of black fur and snapping jaws, driving men back from the entrance. But the fire was the true enemy, spreading along the dry tinder of the upper slopes. Following Lyra's hurried directions, she found a narrow, hidden trail that switchbacked up the inside of the valley wall, emerging above the main fray. From this vantage, the scene was clear and horrifying. Below, a knot of perhaps 15 men, with Torvin at their center, were trying to push a wall of flame toward the valley floor using long, fire-hardened poles. They were flanked by a handful of others desperately fending off Valran attacks. Torvin's face was a mask of fanatical triumph, lit grotesquely by the blaze he nurtured. "Burn, you devils! Burn back to whatever hell spawned you!" Ilara's fear crystallized into a sharp, cold point. She stood, making herself visible on the rocky outcrop. She filled her lungs with smoky air and shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "Torvin!" Heads whipped around. Torvin's eyes, wide and bloodshot, found her. For a moment, pure, unadulterated shock wiped the triumph from his face. Then it contorted into even greater rage. "The witch! She shows her true face!" he bellowed, pointing a thick finger at her. "Shoot her!" An archer fumbled for his bow, but a gray wolf, Fen, slammed into him, sending the man tumbling. The distraction was Lyra's doing. "I'm unarmed," Ilara cried, holding her empty hands high, stepping closer along the ridge, drawing their eyes upward, away from the fire line. "Look at me. I'm just Ilara, the girl you called blighted. Is this what you want? To burn a forest because you're afraid of a story?" "You consort with demons!" Torvin roared, but his men were staring, confused. This wasn't a demon. This was the quiet, sad girl from the village, standing fearless in the heart of the inferno. "Look around you!" she screamed, gesturing to the burning valley, to the Valran who were now pulling back, watching her gamble with palpable horror in their glowing eyes.
You're not hunting monsters. You're burning a library of ancient trees. You're poisoning the river that waters your own fields. You're killing the harmony of this place, and for what? Pride? She took another step, now directly above him, close enough to see the sweat and soot on his face. Rorik saw the truth. Father Alden saw it. They saw children, Torvin, families, just like yours. Is your pride worth murdering children in their beds? The word children hit a nerve. Some of the men faltered, glancing uneasily at each other. The story of the pup caves had circulated, twisted by Torvin, but the seed of doubt was there. Lies, Torvin spat, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He was losing them, and he knew it. His fury focused entirely on her, the source of this unraveling. You're the heart of the corruption. I'll cut it out myself. He hefted his axe and started scrambling up the rocky slope toward her, abandoning the fire line. His obsession had narrowed to a single human target. Ilara's heart slammed against her ribs. This was what she wanted, his attention, but now he was coming and the killing intent in his eyes was very real. She backed up, the edge of the outcrop perilously close behind her. Through the bond, she felt Kaelin's terror eclipse his battle focus. He had seen her. A roar of pure, unadulterated rage split the night, and she saw the black wolf break away from the main fight and begin to race to the base of her ridge, a streak of midnight fury. But Torvin was closer. He reached the top, breathing heavily, his axe gleaming in the firelight. No wolf king to save you now, witch. He lunged. Ilara stumbled back, her foot skidding on loose scree. The edge gave way. For a second, she was falling. Then a searing pain erupted in her shoulder as Torving's axe, meant for a killing blow, bit deep into the muscle instead, its momentum arrested by her collapsing body. She cried out, the world swimming in agony and smoke. Torvin stood over her, raising the axe for the final blow. For the village! A shadow blotted out the firelight. Kaelin landed between them, not in wolf form, but in his powerful human shape, moving with impossible speed. He didn't use a weapon. His hand shot out and closed around the haft of the axe as it descended. He wrenched it from Torvin's grip as if taking a toy from a child, and flung it, clattering, into the darkness. Torvin stared, his bravado finally shattering into primal fear at the sight of the Alpha King, blood-streaked and furious, his golden eyes glowing with otherworldly fire. You, Kaelin growled, the word vibrating with lethal promise. Touched what is mine. He moved. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution averted by a thread of mercy. A single, powerful blow to Torvin's chest sent the village elder flying backwards to land in a heap, gasping for air, his sternum surely cracked. Kaelin didn't follow. He dropped to his knees beside Ilara, his hands hovering over the terrible wound in her shoulder, his face a mask of anguish. The bond was flooded with his panic, his guilt, his devastating love. Ilara, I told you to stay. The fire, she gritted out, the pain making her vision waver. Stop the fire! He looked up. The distraction had worked. With Torvin down and their leader's focus broken, the Valrin warriors had surged. They were driving the remaining villagers back, beating at the flames with soaked pelts, forming a chain from the lake to douse the blaze. The attack was crumbling. Kaelin gathered her gently in his arms, ignoring Torvin's moans. Hold on, he whispered in her hair, his voice thick. Just hold on. As Kaelin carried her down from the ridge, Ilara, fading in and out of consciousness, saw the battle's end. The villagers were retreating, dragging their wounded, their crusade broken against the united will of the Valrin and the shocking courage of the girl they'd scorned. The fires were being contained, reduced to sullen, smoking patches. The cost was visible. Valrin lay wounded, the beautiful valley was scarred, and she had a hole in her shoulder that pulsed with white-hot pain with every heartbeat. But they had held. The heart remained. The bridge, though singed and blood-stained, still stood. As Kaelin rushed her to the healing cave, Ilara's last coherent thought was not of pain, but of the look on Torvin's face. Not just fear of a monster, but the dawning, shattering realization that he had been the true beast all along. The war for the Shadow Veil was over. The healing, for everyone, was just beginning.
Pain was a country Alara drifted in and out of. It had borders of feverish heat and chills, and was populated by disjointed dreams, the river's cold bite, golden eyes, the arc of a burning axe. But always there was an anchor in that country, a steady, golden warmth tethered to her soul, a hand that held hers, a voice that murmured reassurances in the dark. Kalen. He rarely left her side. She would wake to find him slumped in a chair, his head resting on the furs next to her, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. Lyra was the constant, efficient presence, changing dressings soaked with herbal poultices that smelled of earth and bitter healing. The axe had cut deep, nicking bone, and the fever was the next enemy. "The muscle will heal," Lyra told Kalen once when she thought Alara was asleep. "The scar will be significant, but the fever, her human body is fighting the shock, the poison from the dirty blade, and the bond, it is straining her, sharing your vitality to keep her alive, but it is a toll. Whatever it takes." Kalen's voice was a raw scrape. "Use my life force if you must. Drain me. She lives." The ferocity of his vow pierced Alara's haze. She tried to speak, to protest, but only a weak sound emerged. Days blurred. The fever broke on the morning of the 4th day, leaving her weak as a newborn kitten but clear-headed. Sunlight streamed into the healing cave. Kalen was there instantly, helping her sip water. "Welcome back," his voice hoarse with emotion. The relief flowing through the bond was a warm, gentle wave. "Torvin?" she managed to ask. "Alive. His men carried him back to the village. Broken, disgraced. His war is finished." "The valley?" "Scarred, but recovering. The fires are out. The ancient trees live." He brushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "You saved them, Alara. You saved us all." She shook her head weakly. "We saved it, together." As she healed, news trickled in from scouts and from the rare, brave village messenger. Torvin, his authorities shattered, had retreated to his home, a broken man. Father Alden and Marcus, the herbalist, their credibility bolstered by the failed brutal attack, had taken leadership of a peace faction. A formal petition had been signed by over half of the village households, requesting a council to establish permanent borders and a treaty. The Valoran had won not just a battle, but the war of perception. The village had seen the cost of hatred, and many wanted no more of it. When Alara was strong enough to walk, Kalen took her to see the grove of memory trees. A new carving was being etched into the bark, still fresh and weeping sap. It showed a stylized human woman standing between a wall of flame and a valley of trees, one hand raised toward a menacing figure with an axe, the other extended back in protection. Above her, a black wolf leapt in defense. "This is you," Kalen said softly, his arm around her waist supporting her. "The bridge maker, the anima who stood in the fire. Our history will remember." The weight of the honor, the permanence of it, overwhelmed her. "I just did what anyone would have." "No," he said, turning her to face him. His golden eyes were serious, full of a love that had been tempered in crisis. "You did what only you could. You showed us our strength, and you showed them their humanity. You remade the world, Alara."
Weeks passed, turning into a month. Her shoulder healed into a raised pink scar, a permanent reminder of the price of peace. The treaty negotiations began at the stone circle, with Kalen, Lyra, and Alara representing the Valren, and Father Alden, Marcus, and a newly sobered Rorik representing the village. They were long, tedious, often tense discussions about hunting rights, trade routes, markers, and consequences for trespass. But the will was there. The memory of the fire was a potent deterrent to aggression on both sides. One evening, as the first autumn chill kissed the air, Alara found Corin waiting for her by the singing springs. He held out a small, beautifully carved wooden box. For you, he said, not meeting his eyes. From the pack. Inside, on a bed of soft moss, lay a circlet. It was woven of willow, but threaded through it were strands of supple, dark leather and tiny polished river stones that shone like captured amber. It was delicate yet strong, natural yet crafted, a crown for a queen of the in-between. It was my mother's design, Corin said quietly. She believed in the old piece. She would have approved of you. The gift and the sentiment behind it brought tears to Ilara's eyes. It was the final piece of acceptance. She was no longer the Alpha's human. She was their anima. That night, under a sky brilliant with stars, Kaelin led her to their favorite hilltop. The moon-mark pendant felt warm against her skin. He faced her, taking both hands in his. The treaty will be signed at the next full moon. Our peoples will have peace. My duty as Alpha is nearing a new chapter. He took a deep breath. But my heart has known its path since a brave woman waded into a river. Ilara, you are my Talia, my soul's mirror. This bond is my greatest joy and my deepest strength. Will you complete it with me? Will you stand beside me, not just as my mate in spirit, but as my partner in life, before the pack and under the moon? It wasn't a question she needed to consider. The answer lived in the warmth in her chest, in the peace she'd found in his eyes, in the home she'd built in his heart. Yes, she breathed, 1,000 times yes. The full moon ceremony was nothing like a village wedding. It was held in the stone circle, witnessed by the entire pack and the village delegation. Ilara wore a simple dress of Valren-spun fabric and the willow circlet. Kaelin wore his ceremonial leathers and the marks of his lineage. There were no spoken vows. Instead, under the silvery light, they each pricked their palms with a thorn from the ancient peace vine that grew in the heart. They clasped hands, letting their blood mingle, their life forces intertwining as the Talia bond swelled to a crescendo that everyone present could feel, a wave of love, commitment, and profound unity that washed over the clearing. It was a binding of souls, a promise written in blood and magic and choice. As their hands parted, the small wounds healed, leaving only faint, parallel silvery lines, matching scars, inside and out. Later, as they celebrated with both Valren and villagers sharing food and music, Rorik approached them. He looked older, wiser. He bowed his head to Kaelin, then to Ilara. I came to thank you, he said awkwardly, and to ask your pardon. For the spear, for my blindness. You saw the truth when it mattered. That's all that matters now. Rorik nodded, a weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. He looked at their joined hands, at the new peace filling the forest, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. The bridge is built. It's stronger than I ever imagined. As the night deepened, Ilara stood with Kaelin looking out over the Shadow Vale, now a place of shared guardianship rather than fear. Her shoulder ached faintly, a reminder of the cost. His hand in hers was a promise of the future. What now? She asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. Now, Kaelin said, pressing a kiss to her hair, his voice full of a quiet, hard-won joy. We live.
5 years later, the stone circle was once again full of voices, but these were raised in laughter, not anger. The annual peace meeting was part market, part festival, part council. Valren in both forms mingled easily with villagers. A villager's daughter was showing a Valren pup how to braid flower chains. Marcus, the herbalist, was in deep discussion with Lyra over the properties of a newly discovered root. Ilara watched it all from the edge of the clearing, a hand resting on the pronounced curve of her belly. Their second child was due before the first snow. Their first, a bright-eyed boy named Eric, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's storm-gray eyes, was currently trying to ride on the back of a tolerant, elderly Valran wolf who had been a fierce warrior in his youth. The scar on her shoulder sometimes ached when it rained, a whisper of the past. But the silvery lines on her palm, the mark of the blood binding, never did. They were a part of her, like the Talia bond that was now as natural as breathing, a constant, comforting presence in the back of her mind. Kalen came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her head. He was alpha still, but the lines of worry on his face had softened. The peace was holding, growing stronger roots with each passing season. "He's going to give old Fenris a bald patch," Kalen murmured, nodding toward their son. "Fenris doesn't seem to mind," Ilara laughed, leaning back into his solid warmth. Their life was a tapestry woven from two worlds. They spent part of the year in the heart, part in a small, sturdy lodge built at the forest's edge, a true bridge house where villagers and Valran alike were always welcome. Ilara had become a lore keeper, teaching the shared history in both communities, ensuring the lessons of the past were not forgotten. The old hatreds had not vanished entirely. There were still muttered prejudices in some corners of the village, and some Valran, like Corin, now a trusted captain of the scouts, would always be wary. But the will for peace, forged in fire and tempered by cooperation, was stronger. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in glorious shades of amber and rose, a familiar, grizzled figure approached them, leaning on a cane. Torvin. He had aged a decade in 5 years, his body broken, his spirit humbled. He had never asked for forgiveness, and Ilara had never offered it outright, but they had reached a silent, grim understanding. He lived quietly, a reminder of the cost of war. He stopped before them, his eyes on the playing children, human and Valran alike. "The harvest is good this year," he said, his voice raspy. "The soil by the eastern blight, the burned area, it's richer than anywhere else." It was as close to an acknowledgement as he would ever give, that from the ashes of his hatred, new life had grown, stronger than before. He nodded once to both of them and moved on. Later that night, after the festivities had died down and Eric was asleep in a pile of furs, Ilara and Kalen walked in the moonlit forest near their lodge. The silence was companionable, broken only by the sounds of the night creatures and the distant, joyful howl of a Valran celebrating the peace. "Do you ever think about that day by the river?" Ilara asked, slipping her hand into his. Kalen stopped, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes glowed softly. "Every day," he admitted, "and every day I thank every star and spirit that you are you, that you are stubborn and compassionate and impossibly brave." He placed a hand on her rounded belly, where their daughter kicked a greeting. "That you gave me this, a family, a future." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, just as it had in the river so long ago. The Talia hummed with a contented, profound love. "You were the missing piece, Ilara, not just of my soul, but of this world. You showed us how to be whole." In the distance, another howl rose, this one from the village direction, a human child, imitating the sound they no longer feared. It was answered by a genuine, friendly chorus from the woods. Ilara smiled, her heart full. The bridge was not just built, it was traveled upon, lived upon, thriving. The story that began with a warning, "Don't touch that wolf," ended with a kingdom remade, not by a king's decree alone,
by a woman's choice to reach out a hand in the cold water. She was no longer the blighted girl, nor just the alpha's mate. She was Ilara, the bridge maker, the anima, and her howl, a song of hard-won peace and boundless love, was now woven into the very soul of the Shadow Vale, forever.